Unang-una, of course, it came on the heels of the president's visit to the United States, where he met no less than Donald Trump, the US president. They discussed, among others, bilateral relations and, of course, the important tariff agreement. And also that raised concerns about what is going to be the government's response to dealing with the increasingly devastating impact of climate change. In short, kamusta naman yung mga flood control projects? Kailan lang, we had no less than Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. delivering his latest State of the Nation address. At para sa akin, this is potentially the most consequential State of the Nation address by the President because it will define his legacy years in office up until 2028. Bago natin pag-usapan ang State of the Nation address at ano yung mga implications niya for the President, his policies, and for the Philippines, pag-usapan muna natin yung background ng State of the Nation address. Unang-una, of course, it came on the heels of the president's visit to the United States, where he met no less than Donald Trump, the US president. They discussed, among others, bilateral relations and, of course, the important tariff agreement. In addition to that, the president also was able to meet other senior officials in the United States, including the chief of the Pentagon, the defense secretary, and also the secretary of state, as well as national security advisor Marco Rubio. While the Philippines did not get as much discount in the tariff rate of President Trump, 1 percentage point lang, marami din naman nakuha ang Pilipinas when it comes to at least reassurances that bilateral relations will continue to move forward in the right direction when it comes to defense and military cooperation. Not to mention new aid and development assistance to the Philippines, and some would say also potentially billions and billions of dollars of high-tech and quality investments by American companies in the Philippines. The second important, the State of the Nation address also came after huge floods. Maraming taong agribiyado dun sa latest na mga sunod-sunod na typhoon na tumama sa Pilipinas. And of course, that created humanitarian concerns, that created huge economic and infrastructure concerns, and also that raised concerns about what is going to be the government's response to dealing with the increasingly devastating impact of climate change. In short, kamusta naman yung mga flood control projects? And last but not the least, the decision by the Supreme Court of the Philippines to basically strike down the impeachment articles by the House of Representatives against Vice President Sara Duterte. While the Supreme Court made it clear that its ruling had nothing to do with the judgment on the merits of the articles of impeachment, it took some exception with the procedures and the way by which the House of Representatives transmitted the articles of impeachment against the Vice President. Against this backdrop, many were wondering what will be the tone, the cadence, and approach of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., especially because this year, hindi rin nag-attend ang Vice President at mga key supporters of former President Rodrigo Duterte. It was, in many ways, a special SONA, a very high-stakes one, and as I've argued repeatedly, make or break moment for the president. And as I've argued repeatedly, potentially a make or break moment for President Marcos Jr. The main task for the president in his State of the Nation address was to make sure na hindi siya mukhang lame duck. Dahil ito po yung argumento ng kanyang mga kalaban. To portray him as weak, to portray him as a passe, and to say that he has no longer any political capital. But an objective look at the State of the Nation address of the president shows that it was actually not only conciliatory, but also very constructive and at times strident. If anything, the president medyo nag-real talk din siya towards the end, and he had some indirect jabs at his political critics. Over the past decade or so, actually napanood ko lahat ng mga SONA. During the Pinoy time, medyo bata pa tayo nun, bata pa naman tayo, I was actually a humble staff in the House of Representatives. I had a chance to watch the SONA as a kind of a member of the institution itself, right? As part of the government itself. Over the coming years naman, nung pumasok tayo sa media, first as a resident analyst for GMA Network, previous to that for the ABS-CBN, and more recently for TV5 and One News, I've had to cover the State of the Nation address as a journalist and as an anchor and analyst. But during the latest SONA, I had the privilege to watch it live dyan sa Batasan. And I must say the experience was quite something because it allowed me to better understand not only the mood in the room, but also get a sense of the president and what he was trying to transmit to the Filipino nation. Prior, during, and after the speech of President Marcos Jr., maraming tayo nag-post ukol sa yumaon na presidente, that former President Pinoy, because they made comparisons between the two presidents in light of the fact that this time, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., our current president, the incumbent, actually spoke mostly in Filipino. Probably 95%, if not almost the entirety of the speech was delivered in Filipino, quite similar to former President Pinoy. Not to mention the tone of the State of the Nation address was also quite familiar. At least for people like me who had the privilege of watching also the State of the Nation addresses of the former President Aquino. The tone was very statesman-like, but at times also constructive, even if also conciliatory. So in one speech, one of the shortest State of the Nation addresses delivered by President Marcos Jr., he was able to achieve multiple things. Now, what's interesting for me is that while kino-compare itong State of the Nation address ni Pangulong Marcos Jr. kay Pinoy, actually, I see more parallels, not necessarily with the State of the Nation address pa, kasi hindi pa naman presidente ito, senador pa lang ito, but another Aquino. In particular, I have Bam Aquino in mind. If you look at Bam Aquino, who performed incredible in the latest elections in 2025, garnering more than 20 million votes, ending up at number 2 in defiance of almost all surveys and expectations, despite his limitations. You know, the success of Bam Aquino was built on this argument and assumption, which was proven right, that ang hanap ng tao ay hindi political polarization. Actually, ang hinahanap ng tao is less yung mga polarizing issue, in as much as rule of law is important, in as much as territorial integrity is important, pero yung pangunahin na mga pangailangan ng ating tao, ito yung dapat focus ng mga politiko, or at least ito yung sinabi ni Bam Aquino during the elections. In fact, if you look at the campaign strategy of Bam Aquino, and to a lesser degree, I would say also Kiko Pangilinan, who also was very successful in the latest election, para sila, they did not touch on contentious issues in as much as people expected. Was Philippine Sea? Not so much. ICC? Not so much. Impeachment, actually, not so much. At times, Bam even seemed like evasive. Although, of course, the argument was that if he were to become a senator judge, he has to make sure that he projects, and he is, as much as possible, objective and looks at the evidence of the case without prejudging it. Now, bakit ito mahalaga? Because kung tinignan mo yung SONA ni President Marcos Jr., he also avoided touching on, at least directly, on a lot of these contentious issues. He didn't discuss the impeachment trial or the supposed impeachment trial against the vice president, nor did he discuss the Supreme Court ruling. There was also not so much any mention at all, in fact. He didn't also mention at all the International Criminal Court in light of the fact that, you know, there's a possibility na may iba na naman mahuli at dadaling dyan sa ICC based on accusations or allegations of crimes against humanity under the former Duterte administration. Wala rin sinabi si President Marcos Jr. ukol dun sa application for interim release by the former president and all sorts of different drama and narratives concocted by the pro-Duterte elements to cast aspersions on the current administration's decision to cooperate with the ICC by handing over former President Duterte to the International Court. Now, kung tinignan natin yung State of the Nation address, kalahati nun had to do something with really important issues like education, food security, and also healthcare. In a way, as far as President Marcos Jr. is concerned, he stole the thunder from a lot of rivals, and people have been critical of him. Remember that Christopher Bongo, Senator Bongo, who topped the Senate race, isa sa kanyang mga winning formula was to emphasize yung kanyang contribution to the malasakit centers. Let's not also forget that Bam Aquino's success also had to do a lot with his advocacy for education issues. And pagdating naman kay Kiko Pangilinan, food security. Interestingly, the president, who actually controls the executive agencies, implements the relevant policies, can really help millions and millions of people over the coming years, yun din yung kanyang focus. In fact, one of the things I did during yung State of the Nation address was to observe yung reaction ng mga iba't ibang congressman, iba't ibang senador at mga people in attendance. Now, hindi ko alam dun sa isang congressman na mukhang nag-i-bingo pa o kung ano-anong ginagawa. But I was very curious about the reaction of Bam Aquino, Kiko, and it seemed like, especially in the case of Bam Aquino, I felt he was quite appreciative of the speech, and I think he also reflected that in his post-SONA interventions and interviews. Now, going back to this, I think mahalaga din na pinag-usapan ni Pangulo Marcos Jr. yung issue ng edukasyon, yung issue ng pagkain, mga kabataan, yung tulong sa mga guro, yung infrastruktura. Because if you look at it, especially the fact that the huge part of his speech kept on coming back to the issue of education, sa aking palagay, it was quite a jab at, it was quite an indirect criticism of former Education Secretary and current Vice President Sara Duterte. Remember, one of the biggest criticism of the former Secretary of Education was its inefficiencies and failures, not only alleged anomalies in dispensing with government funds, not to mention confidential funds. So, by emphasizing ano yung mga nangyayari, ano bang pwede mangyari, ano yung mga improvements na nangyari, ano yung mga goals ni Pangulo Marcos Jr. when it comes to enhancing our education standards, dealing with our education crisis, my sense is it was an indirect jab also at the Vice President, who was not so effective by every objective standard as a former Education Secretary, in as much as it was also, of course, an endorsement of our current Education Secretary, Sonia Ngara, the former senator, who seems to have assembled a very effective team of education experts and very high caliber people who seem to really know what they're doing when it comes to dealing with the education crisis in the country. By talking about healthcare, PhilHealth, ano yung mga coverage nito, ano mga sakit na pwede cover ito, ano mga tulong na pwede bigay ng gobyerno sa mga ating mga kababayan. He also quite stole the thunder from the Duterte's, particularly Bongo's malasakit whole narrative. And not to mention by emphasizing food security and agriculture, that was also music to the ears of liberal stalwarts like Kiko Pangilinan. So in many ways, the president was able to find that kind of Goldilocks middle point in order to build this kind of grander coalition. Well, to be honest, it looks like the president will have a hard time winning back the core supporters of the former president in light of what happened with ICC, among other things. Of course, alam natin, grabe yung hidwaan with the Duterte side. But I think the president had a good chance of winning over progressives, liberals, and a lot of undecided and non-partisan Filipinos who want nothing but the rule of law, accountability, and good governance, good and effective governance. And I think that was the line that the president took. And I think it was strategically sound for him to do that. I mean, in many ways, that was something that worked for Bam Aquino and Kiko Pangilinan, also in the latest elections. So that's why I said, ironically, parang I see more echoes of Bam Aquino than Pinoy in the State of the Nation address by the president. Nevertheless, what I appreciated also with the State of the Nation address is yung build-up niya, yung cadence niya, yung denouement niya, very clearly also how he ended it on a strong note. In fact, on a strident note. You know, the critics of the president always try to criticize him by saying, well, among other things, he's indecisive, he's conflict avoidant. And to be honest, this is something that I've also reflected in my own vlogs, interventions, and writings. But in fairness to the president, he took quite a strong stance against a number of very big anomalous issues. Kasama dyan yung flood control projects. In fact, the president started his State of the Nation address by making almost an apologetic note, saying that ramdam niya yung frustration ng taong bayan, that he saw the relatively poor performance of his allies in the midterm elections as a call by the Filipino people for him to step up, for his administration to step up. So while he took that humble step and accepting na nakulang siya, at the same time, he also took a strident step and tone when it comes to yung mga anomalya, which could potentially involve also people who are allied to him or close to the administration. So I think that was quite a risky but a very important and principled move by President Marcos Jr. When sinabi niya, now we have to make sure na yung mga questionable insertions, yung mga mumbo-jumbo na ginagawa sa budget, not to mention yung mga flood control project, kailangan natin pag-aralan mga yan. Tignan natin kung may abuso. At hopefully, may accountability na mangyari dyan. Now, the president did not specify what is he going to do exactly with alleged insertions and other questionable anomalous practices. He was not also absolutely clear about whether there will be criminal liability for people who have engaged in all of these mumbo-jumbo, questionable flood control projects. But nevertheless, he set the tone, and I think the right tone, and that's what I want to talk about towards the end of these explainers. And that's what I want to talk about in the latter part of this explainer episode. Mahiya naman kayo. Of course, that's a very important thing for the president to say. But some were wondering if he'll go beyond that. More like, hoy, matakot kayo. Wag kayo gumawa ng kalokohan. So I think people are looking for more details. But at least the president set the tone. But one thing I also appreciated about the State of the Nation address was hindi lang may mga patama si Presidente dun sa mga ibang tao. And I think many people realize which particular conglomerate involved in water services was perhaps at the receiving end of the president's not so subtle criticism. But you know, the other thing I also very much appreciated with the State of the Nation address was the sense of humor and the punchline, particularly where the president pointed out the people's champion Manny Pacquiao, our great athletes, Olympians, and then I knew saan siya papunta. And then I could see where this was going. And then minention niya the new boxing champion, General Nicolas Torre, who by every indicator was the star of the night. I think not only was President Marcos Jr. very fond of how the PNP chief has been, really executing his job in the best way possible, dealing with critics, dealing with people who are trying to bully him, including the mayor of Davao, and how he has turned it into his own favor and raising tens of millions of pesos for a boxing match where he won by default kasi hindi nagpakita yung kabilang kampo after hinamon siya. So the star of the night clearly was General Torre, and I'll tell you what, who knows, maybe General Torre, if he continues his current momentum, I don't think it will be impossible to see him even as a standard bearer for the administration, not only a senatorial candidate. We have a long history of former PNP chiefs making it big in politics, whether it's Senator Panfilo Lacson, whether it's Senator Bato de la Rosa. But in the case of General Torre, who knows? He could go even for higher positions down the road if he maintains his current momentum. So it was quite something for President Marcos Jr. to really make that honorable mention of General Torre, which really resonated among everyone. And for some of you, you may have seen that just before the SONA, nag-meet kami ni General Torre, and it was very interesting. So, he was meeting everyone, and then when he was going out, nagpa-selfie lang ako sa kanya. Hey, kamusta ganon? And then I went back to my table doon sa gilid. Kasi hindi naman, shy ako hindi ako nakikipag-halo. Biglang pumunta siya sa akin ulit. At basically, pinag-usapan namin yung mga kulit na bagay na ginawa namin. I think some of you may have seen a video I posted where, my taekwondo black belt skills, let's just put it that way. I think nakita ni General Torre yan. And he said, oh, magaling ka pala, or something like that. And someone suggested, why not you two go like this? So that's where the iconic picture came in, which has been very trolled, but has also gone viral. So my good vibes. There was really a good vibes at the SONA in ways that I did not anticipate. And I think the president himself really ended on good vibes. I mean, he strolled into the SONA very relaxed. And then the way he ended it on a very strong note and the way he exited yung batasan, it was a very suave performance, I think, by the president. Even if, and this is what I'm going to discuss next, even if sa aking palagay, there were many important omissions. So para sa akin, I was hoping the president will say something about the Supreme Court ruling, will say something about impeachment, will say something about ICC, will say something about the West Philippine Sea. But as I discussed, I think the strategy of the president was to say, i-freeze muna natin yung politika, focus muna tayo sa taong bayan, at ito yung mga proyekto na meron tayo, at gusto lang natin tulungan ng taong bayan. So I think that was the kind of tone and cadence that the president wanted to be the defining narrative behind his SONA. In many ways, the animating force for his final years, legacy years in office. Having said that, what should come next? Now, agree ako dun sa mga ibang critics na syempre kulang sa details dito. Yung ibang issue naman siguro ay more like just re-explaining to people what has been already there, whether in terms of PhilHealth benefits, whether in terms of government initiatives, infrastructure projects. But first of all, you only have 1 hour or so. So hindi mo masabi lahat ng bagay. Hindi naman ito presentation ng, project impact risk assessment, whatever, right? Hindi siya detailed PowerPoint presentation or lecture. It's more like setting the tone. It's like a grand blueprint. So I think critics should be fair also in a sense that, they should not look for really, all the nitty-gritties in a State of the Nation address, right? Nevertheless, I think it is important that the administration, that the relevant officials in the government explain sa ating taong bayan, yung mga malalaking proyekto, mga initiatives ng government na minention ng ating Pangulo. And I think it's also very important for us to see more and more updates on some of the contentious issues that the president, perhaps strategically, did not cover in his SONA, but nevertheless his administration is dealing with. So, for instance, we have heard statements from Malacanang, from the new Secretary of Press, Claire Castro, Attorney Claire Castro, who we have had on our show here on Pilipinas 360 Degrees, that, you know, the administration respects the decision of the Supreme Court, but begs to disagree. So I think it's nice to see what will be, what are the grounds for this disagreement. To hear more clarification on that point. Well, on as an aside, we know that certain DDS elements have been trying to harass certain people by filing petitions against certain individuals for supposedly making contemptuous, commentaries, with respect to the ruling. I think it's very important for the administration to emphasize freedom of expression, for the administration to also emphasize that we have to respect separation of powers. We have to respect the integrity of Supreme Court, but we also have to respect the right of the Filipino people to engage in a healthy and substantive debate, sometimes even spirited and passionate about the Supreme Court ruling, because this is a matter of national interest and a matter of rule of law. The Supreme Court has its own version, but critics also have their own understanding of how the Supreme Court should have decided on this issue. And as a democracy, it's about freedom of expression. So I think it's very important for the administration to not only clarify what are the grounds for its potential disagreement with the Supreme Court ruling, but also to emphasize the fundamental freedoms of our democracy. More than that, sana in the coming days and months we'll also see more clarity, if not from the president himself, if not from the Malacanang, but at least from relevant secretaries and all, ukol dun sa issue ng ICC. Are we gonna rejoin the ICC? Are we gonna cooperate with the ICC? How are we gonna cooperate with ICC when it comes to protection of witnesses, when it comes to potential arrest of other important individuals, including a certain senator? I think everyone knows whom I'm referring to. These are the key points that we hope to see more clarification on in the coming weeks and months. Now, one big thing that was not mentioned in the SONA, I didn't expect the president to mention it, but I think it's going to be one of the defining elements of the legacy years of the president, is yung appointment ng sino maging susunod na ombudsman. I think it's very important to get the right person in charge of that very important office. Kasi yung trabaho ng ombudsman office is to make sure na walang kalokohan na nangyari and to go after yung mga opisyales na gumagawa ng kung ano ng kalokohan or krimen, right? So the ombudsman office is also one pillar of accountability. And it's important to see who will be appointed as ombudsman and what kind of support the administration will provide for the ombudsman office in order to exercise his duty in the best way possible as an independent body, obviously. Mahirap yung trabaho ng ombudsman, and that's why we need to get the best possible person as our next ombudsman. That's something that we're going to watch out for because may kinalaman din ito sa issue ng rule of law. Now, let me also go to the big picture. West Philippine Sea. Obviously, I think there was a reason why the president did not talk about the West Philippine Sea as much, is because next year maging ASEAN chair tayo. And as ASEAN chair, we are expected to reflect the common ground, the shared interests and views of the entirety of Southeast Asia. 10 different countries with 10 very different threat perceptions and geopolitical alignments. Yes, we are a US treaty ally. Yes, meron tayong hidwaan with China in the West Philippine Sea. But Cambodia, Laos, they have very different take on matters. And even Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei, not to mention Singapore, who also are, a part of maritime Asia and have concerns with yung mga nangyayari sa West Philippine Sea and South China Sea. They also have some differences in terms of their opinion what should be done. So I think it's very important for the Philippines to be neutral in a principled way that advances a rules-based international order. So I think it was the right thing for the president. Although personally, I wanted him to mention more West Philippine Sea, and it could have been a rallying cry kasi yun yung isa sa mga strong points ng kasalukuyan na administrasyon. But nevertheless, I understand why he had to be very calibrated on that issue. But I hope in the coming weeks and months, magkakaroon din tayo ng clarity in terms of what the president wants to happen under our ASEAN chairmanship next year. Is it a year whereby we're finally gonna have the code of conduct or legally binding code of conduct or a final draft of that? Is next year gonna be a year where we're gonna think about alternative options, a code of conduct among ASEAN members who have South China Sea claims, West Philippine Sea claims themselves. What kind of tone are we going to adopt vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis United States, and the competition between those two superpowers? So these are important things that we hope to have more ideas about in more detail based on the statements of DFA and other relevant agencies, and also the president himself in the coming months and weeks, because by the end of this year, we're going to take over as the chairman of ASEAN. Now, the other thing that is also important is that sana magkaroon din tayo ng more clarity about the direction of our foreign relations, particularly with the United States. Now, there's a lot of debate about how successful the president's visit to the United States has been. But what's clear is at least there is a certain rapport with President Trump. It looks like there's strategic sympathy for the Philippines, at least from top officials like Marco Rubio, like Hexeth. Other people who believe the Philippines as a frontline state should get more support from the United States, particularly in the defense front, but also on the development front, right? So we want to see more of those things. But let me end on this point. For me, whether you voted for President Marcos Jr. or not, whether you agree with him or not, whether you think he's a good president or not, let's not forget that if he succeeds in fulfilling the duties and fulfilling the initiatives that he laid out in the State of the Nation address, this is going to be a success for all of us. The success of the president will be the success of all of us. And I'm particularly talking about all of those good initiatives and projects on education, on food, and on healthcare. Not to mention, and this is my ultimate point, we want the president to also succeed in terms of putting the Philippines on the global map as a rising middle power. We're the fastest growing economy in Southeast Asia. We missed getting upgraded to upper middle income nation by just what, 26, 27, $28, right? So we're almost there. And I think what's important to see in the coming weeks and the final and legacy years of President Marcos Jr. is to consolidate our position as a rising star in the global geopolitical landscape, as an increasingly independent and self-reliant nation, just as we also develop our relationship, not only with the United States and our traditional allies, but also with other important middle powers, whether it's Japan, whether it's France, whether it's Poland, whether it's the United Kingdom, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, whether, of course, India, not to mention Turkey and all other different countries who are offering to help us to develop our basic defensive capabilities so that we can become more self-reliant and have a credible defense posture para hindi naman tayo bubuliin at may masabi naman tayo pag binubuli tayo ng mga mas malalaking bansa, especially dyan sa West Philippine Sea. At para naman maprotektahan natin ang ating karagatan at ating soberenya. Now, for me, the next 3 years will be very crucial, not only for President Marcos Jr. himself, but also for the Filipino nation. I think we are entering a critical juncture in world history. There could be major wars. There could be great opportunities for attracting high quality investments. There's also an immense challenge, but also an opportunity for the Philippines to rebrand ourselves as a next big dynamo in Asia, for us to help our tourism sector, for us to get more manufacturing investment. Kaya yan. Kaya yan. And I think we as Filipinos, whether we agree with the president or not, whether we have voted for him or not, whether we completely agree with him on certain key issues or not, all of us have a stake in helping making the Philippines, well, great again. On that note, I hope you enjoyed this latest humble explainer about not only yung State of the Nation address of President BBM, but also what lies ahead for the Philippines and what we hope to happen in the coming months and years para naman ang Pilipinas will finally regain our place of pride among nations, something we really deserve as a rising dynamo in Asia.